Good evening, boys and girls. Now, if I can get the PowerPoint started. Here we go. Good evening. Tonight you are going to watch The Rise of the Dictators. Very important to World War II is during the 1920s and the 1930s how dictators gained power in Europe. First of all, you have to understand what's going on in Europe at that time. Remember we talked about the Great Depression, and not only the United States was in a Great Depression, but Europe was in a Great Depression. Imagine that you are unemployed German factory worker in 1938. You approve of Hitler and his policies because he offered a job, place to live. He also brought back pride. The German people were very almost annihilated, just in disgrace, sort of speaking, after World War I. They also were in debt, and Hitler brought back factory jobs. He rebuilt the country. He rebuilt the military. He just brought back the national pride of the country. Okay, so you need to imagine from the German people's perspective of that time to really understand how Hitler became power. But Hitler wasn't the only one that became power or that gained power at that time. We also had other dictators. What do you think was going on in Europe after World War I? I just said they were in a terrible depression. Terrible depression. Every country in Europe was in a depression. But which country had it worse? What do you think? Which country have I been talking about? Okay? At that time, totalitarian, and you need to know what this word means, became very popular form of government. It's a single party, and its leaders have total control on all aspects of people's lives. It's not communism, okay? It's not socialism. Most totalitarian governments have military leaders. It's run very militarism. They rule it with an iron fist. The military is the police force of the country. And also that leads to dictators. It's a leader who controls the nation by force, using the military. You believe in what I say, you vote how I want you to vote, or else. And or else is usually they go to jail. In some cases, they lose their lives if they didn't believe in the policy of the dictator. Fascism, a political philosophy in which total power is given to a dictator and individual freedoms are denied. Now, all three of these types of government and people, a dictator is a person, fascism is a type of government, totalitarian is a type of government, all have three things in common. They all rule with an iron fist, which is usually the military. They all have very strict control over society, what is taught in the schools, what books they use to teach, what the history books say, what the English books say. They tell people when they get out of school where they are going to, what jobs they're going to have, if they're able to go to school, where they will live. You have to believe in if they want to pass a tax, if they want to pass any kind of law. A dictator passes their own law. They don't have a Congress or anybody that they have to answer to like in the United States. So all three of them are kind of totalitarian, a dictator, and fascism all have that in common. It's total, absolute control by force. Okay. Four leaders that we are looking at, and they were all dictators. They all were totalitarian type of government or a fascism type of government. Joseph Stalin was the leader of the Soviet Union, and he was actually a communist. He was a leader of the Communist Party, which was a totalitarian government, so to speak, back then, but he was probably the most lenient of the following. Benito Mussolini, Italy. He was a fascist. And that's how he ruled his country, with absolute control. Same thing. He used the military to control him. And his policies, he didn't rely on anybody else, any advisors. He did not have any parliament, any Congress that had to argue about the law. He was, what he said, went. And then, of course, Adolf Hitler, who I've already talked about, and Tojo, the Japanese military leader. Okay, factors that led to the rise of dictators. Political instability. Okay, as we said, during that time in Europe, Europe was in a Great Depression. And during that time, there wasn't that many strong leaders. They went through a few leaders that did not last long. So anyone with a very strong personality, like Hitler or like Mussolini, became dictators very easily because they were charismatic. The people loved listening to them. But the country was in chaos to begin with. Germany's high war debt was also an issue. They had to, if you remember from World War I, they had to pay reparations after World War I to the countries, to the winning side, the countries of the winning side, and that put them further in debt. So, and as I said, we already said worldwide depression, not just in the United States. Massive unemployment throughout Europe. Fascism and other totalitarian governments just took over. High inflation. Prices were so high, people couldn't afford to buy things. So basically the same thing that was going on during the Great Depression in our country was going on in Europe. The difference being we had a very strong leader. A leader who knew how to take charge. Also, I think our democracy came into play. Europe did not have that for the most part. Okay, summary. Okay, read the summary. I'm going to read the summary. You please read it silently. And you need to go back, if you need to go back to the PowerPoint so you can fill in all the spaces on the worksheet that you have. It's the political and economic conditions in Europe following World War I led to the rise of fascism and to World War II. The rise of fascism threatened peace in Europe and Asia. Fascist dictators include Hitler, Mussolini, and Tojo. Dictators led the countries that became known as the Axis powers. You do need to know the Axis powers, and we'll get into those later. So that's kind of the summary. Okay, please go back through this and make sure you have the worksheet, the graphic organizer, filled out on the front. On the back, you need to define totalitarianism and draw a picture that represents that, or a symbol. Dictator, define it. Make sure you draw a symbol that represents that. And fascism, define it in that space and draw a picture that represents that. Okay, have a good night. And we'll see you tomorrow morning, or Friday, or Monday, whenever.